Hi and welcome back. This is Diary of a Barrister, the Lawyer Diaries. I'm Chelsea Brooke Ward, your host, employment barrister, head of the employment team at Park Square Barristers, and here to talk to you about all things lawyer. Now, today I want to talk to you about the thing that almost every aspiring barrister types into Google at some point, usually late in the night, usually after another rejection email, usually with that knot in their stomach that says, maybe this just isn't for me. And that search is some version of how do I actually get pupillage? Not the glossy version, not the website version, the real version. That's what we're here to talk about. Nobody seems to explain the process and the reality of the situation properly. And that's what I'm here to do. Because here's the truth. Most people don't fail to get pupillage because they aren't clever enough. They don't fail because they don't work hard enough. They fail because they don't understand what the bar is really searching for. And nobody ever sits them down and explains it to them in plain English with the practical steps that they can apply to their journey. That was my experience, and that is why I do what I do. There was so much stuff online, so many websites that gave you information about becoming a barrister, the process in place, and the things that you needed. But it's all very generic advice in the sense of get good grades, get legal work experience, have transferable skills, which is all great. But if you don't come from a background of academics or professionals and you've not been in such an intense interview application process before, and you don't know how to articulate yourself and sell yourself effectively in an interview in a methodical way, then it's really difficult, because that real practical application of your transferable skills within the application is where a lot of people struggle. Like, I know I can do this, or I know I've got this experience, but how do I articulate and use that in the best possible way? Or how do I even identify what's good and bad experience? How do I know what is relevant and what is not relevant? And how do I say it's relevant in the way that they're looking for or wanting to understand? Now, when I was applying for pupillage, I didn't come from a family of lawyers or a family of professionals. I didn't grow up knowing what chambers were or how this world worked. I didn't have dinner table conversations about advocacy or which set was a good crime set or strong in employment or which university to go to make sure I had the best possible chance of getting a job as a lawyer. Those were just not conversations that we had. I had to work it out the hard way through trial and error and through countless rejections, a lot of rejections. And if I'm honest with you, I did have moments of huge self-doubt. I also had quite blissful moments of naivety because I didn't know what I didn't know. And so when heading to bar school, for example, I didn't know how hard it was to become a barrister because I'd not really researched it and I didn't have that information readily available to me. So that blissful naivety in some way did help. But of course, my journey could have been a lot less painful and perhaps a little quicker had I been able to navigate and understand the process a little bit more. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I do this kind of work. I remember sitting at my laptop, refreshing my emails, heart racing every time a notification came through, and then that sinking sickness feeling when it was another polite no. And what nobody tells you is how personal that feels. I was sick to death of people saying to me, it's not because you're not good enough, it's because there is another candidate that was just better on that occasion. And I know that was said to console my hurt feelings. But you do get to a stage where you just think, how much more have I got to give? It's a soul destroying process for most. And it doesn't matter how many times people tell you that. It really doesn't make the process any easier. Now, you can reframe that process. And to do that takes some grit and determination. Because if you don't, then people can dress it up as it's competitive all they want. But when you've poured your heart and soul into an application, when you've rearranged your whole life around this goal, rejection doesn't feel academic. It feels like someone is quietly saying to you, you're not enough. And that, I was there. I felt that. I said that. I've been there. I've got the t-shirt. But I'm here to say to you that what you're doing is unhelpful to your journey. I've also been there, I've done that, and I've got that t-shirt. And so I want to help you with some reframing of those self-criticism remarks and hopefully make your journey a little bit better than mine was. Because that's where people start to go wrong, when they start berating themselves because that one no, they start saying, I'm not good enough. From one no. Now, when I sit here and I look back on that whole process, it is wild to me that we let that one no define who we think we are. Because at the end of the day, that one no doesn't define you as a person. It defines that application at that moment in time. So we have to rephrase that. And it came to me today that one of the biggest skills a barrister needs is resilience, especially if you're going into the civil type work. But in any work, in any area, you have to have resilience, because let me tell you, people are going to test that resilience even when you're in practice. You're in a litigious profession, which means people are not scared to complain. And you have to have that resilience to stand by your opinions, to have the confidence to give an opinion in the first place, but also the confidence to stand up to that opinion and that complaint. And also, the resilience that you're not going to win every case. So if you look at this journey and that one no as a learning objective to take it on the chin and see what else can be done next time around. Because if you want a different outcome, if you want change, then you have got to change. Because when we internalize that message, instead of interrogating the process, we really set ourselves back more than we actually need to. So let's strip this right back. Pupillage is not a reward for being the best law student. It's not a prize for getting top grades alone. And it's not even really about how much you want it, no matter how passionate you are. Pupillage is a recruitment exercise. That's what it is. Chambers are asking a very simple question, even if they don't articulate it in this way. Can we see this person standing on their feet, representing our clients, surviving the pressure of practice and enhancing our set rather than draining it? That is the simple question that they are asking. And everything within the application form flows from that one question. And once you understand that, your entire approach to the whole process should change. So I'll give you a real example. I once had a mentee who had flawless academics, and I mean flawless. First class degree, distinctions, scholarships, experience, the lot, you name it, they had it. On paper, they were outstanding. But when I asked them about advocacy and being on their feet, about dealing with a difficult client or an awkward judge, the types of conversations that you have with a mentee, their answers were really abstract, and it was actually quite surprising. They talked about what they would do. They talked in very generic terms that they had a passion for advocacy. It's a big one that I come across time and time again, and spoke more theoretically rather than lived experience. No examples, no specificity. And it's quite mind-blowing that people approach applications in this way, because you are going on into a profession where you are trying to persuade judges and juries of a particular stance. You're not going to go in there doing that with theories, conspiracy theories, what the defendant might do next time. Next time he might not stab his best friend, so therefore he's not guilty. That's not how you approach it. You approach it by speaking to the specific evidence, and that is what you need to do with an application. So contrast that with another candidate I've seen over the years. Also, solid academics, not extraordinary, but good. When they spoke about advocacy, they told very specific stories. They spoke about being in a club whilst they were at university that had to advocate for membership, that had to advocate for certain decisions to be made by this club membership. They were on one of the committee boards. So they spoke about specific examples with regards to that. They also spoke about some of the pro bono work that they'd done for the free representation unit, where a judge had interrupted them mid-submissions, how their mind went blank for half a second and they absolutely lost their train of thought, but how they paused, asked for a moment, regrouped and adjusted their arguments to deal with the judge's intervention, and then reverted back to their submissions from the point that they were interrupted. They explained that from that moment, they learned how, or it changed the way they prepare certain cases. So not sticking to a script so that you lose your train of thought during judge's intervention. Wow. Specific example, specific lesson, and specific intention of applying that moving forward. Done. So the second answer tells Chambers far more than any grade could, because academia and application are not one and the same thing. And that's where I want to pause and say this clearly, because it matters. Chambers are not looking for perfection. They are not looking for a fully fledged barrister. They are looking for evidence. Evidence that you understand the reality of the job. Evidence that you can reflect on the actions that you take and the situations you're in. Evidence that you can learn. Evidence that you won't crumble the first time something goes wrong. Evidence that you're going to run away after they've invested so much time and energy into you. Evidence. Specific evidence. Most aspiring barristers massively underestimate how much reflection matters. People think that reflection is this buzzword. It isn't. Reflection is how Chambers assess whether you will get better with experience, or whether you're just going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, or whether you're unteachable, because people that can't reflect on the things that they've done, the actions that they've taken, are really difficult to teach. So let me tell you a story from my own journey. So early on into my career, I had a hearing that didn't go well. I've had many more since then. I prepared, but on reflection, maybe not in the way that I should have done. So I knew the area of law, but I thought I hadn't really thought about how the judge would experience my submissions. Now, I talk quite fast, and I had a lot to say. I've always got a lot to say. And I went in there with a time-limited opportunity for submissions. So sometimes in employment law, they give you 20 minutes to do your closing submissions. It might be an hour, depending on the complexity of the case. And in this particular case, I had 20 minutes. But there was a lot to get through. And there was a lot of nuanced sort of principles taken from some case law. So I went in there, all guns blazing, spoke far too fast because I had so much to say. And the judge just blew up, to say it politely, because they weren't able to take a note of what I was saying, so didn't follow anything that I'd said for about 10 minutes. Now, I thought that saying everything that I needed to say was the way to approach that, and the way to approach that was to speak quicker so that I could get it all in. It wasn't, because the judge didn't even listen to any of it. And I remember that because I don't know whether you've ever been in a situation where someone is just talking at you and you're looking at them and they're speaking and you see their mouth moving, but nothing they say is going in. I've had a couple of occasions since then where I've actually been in this trance-like state, just looking at them and nodding as if I am taking it in, but they're talking too fast and just talking at me that I've got no idea what they're talking about. I mean, they could be offering me £1 million at this stage and I've got no fucking idea. And it sent me back to that moment of, oh my God, I sent the judge into a trance-like state. And even months down the line, you can still reflect on things that you've done and improve, because life is a journey and every day is a lesson. No chambers is looking for somebody that thinks they are perfect, because if you go in there thinking you're perfect and you articulate yourself in that way, it means you don't have that reflective capability to look back on things and actually, being truthful to yourself, say, actually, yes, I could improve. So stop thinking that you have to be this perfect mold of a barrister. That is not what chambers are looking for. Now, I could have walked away from that situation and just thought, bad day at the office, move on. But instead, I pulled it apart, really saying to myself, what went wrong? And why did I decide to speak at such a rapid pace? What could I do differently next time? And every single case I do and conclude, I have those same thought processes. Even where we've got a good, great outcome, I still reflect on, is there anything that I could have done better? Could I have made the client feel better? Could I have made a different point? Could we have got, a higher award? Even when things go well, you still reflect, because you want to know what went well, what didn't go well, what you want to do next time, and what you want to change. And sometimes that process is quite uncomfortable. Honest self-assessment is what turns experience into evidence. So ditch the perfectionist thoughts, because that's not what people just want to hear. They want to know that you have the ability to self-reflect, change, self-reflect, keep the good stuff, ditch the bad stuff. And here's the mistake I see all the time in applications. Candidates list experience like it's a CV. Mooting, mini pupillages, marshalling, pro bono, moving on. They think the fact that they did the thing is enough. It's not. Everyone has done the thing. So you need to start approaching the applications with the full knowledge that everyone's going to have a law degree. Everyone's going to have a law degree or equivalent. Everyone's going to have the bar course. Everyone's going to have the LPC if that's the course that you're taking. Everyone's going to have, to some degree, some legal work experience. Everyone's going to have, to some degree, some mooting experience. Everyone's going to have, to some degree, some life experience and other types of work experience. So just listing that isn't enough. Approach it like everyone has done that thing. What matters is what you learned from that thing and whether that learning changed you and how. So when you're drafting an application form, you're answering a question about advocacy or resilience or motivation. Stop asking yourself, what sounds impressive? Also a big issue. And start asking yourself, what moment genuinely shaped me? What moments really had an impact on the person that I am today? Because those moments tend to be, somewhat quite messy. They're not polished. They involve nerves. They involve mistakes. They involve self-doubt. But most importantly, they involve growth. So stop with the, what do they want to hear? What sounds impressive? And start being authentic. I worked with another mentee who was convinced that their background put them at a disadvantage. They didn't go to a Russell Group university, didn't have family connections. They felt like everyone else had a head start from those types of backgrounds. And instead of hiding their characteristics, we leaned into it. They spoke honestly about feeling out of place in legal spaces and learning about how to hold their own in rooms where they initially felt that they didn't belong. And they framed that not as a weakness, but as proof of their adaptability and grit. One of the most remarkable things about this mentee was the reasons why they chose to be a barrister. And it was because one of their family members had been wrongly convicted and had spent a number of, I can't remember if it was months or years in prison for something that they in fact didn't do. They later were exonerated, but their curiousness with how that was even possible in this country or in this lifetime set them on this journey to making sure that that didn't happen for anybody else. And also from the perspective of not the wrongly accused, but how that impacted on the family. And they were scared to say that in interviews and applications because they didn't want to be judged by the stigma that might be attached to that, in the sense of, well, did he do it? Are they a relation to a criminal? The reality is, the law says he's exonerated. And the reality is, that is your reason why, or their reason why, I should say. How impactful. Because when you have a genuine reason, a genuine why to do this job, it means that you're not just in it for the money. It means that you're here to stay and that you are going to try your hardest to make sure you're good at the job and you're good for your clients. So having that reason why, a genuine, authentic reason why, makes those types of applications stand out. And that application did, because it was real. Now, authenticity isn't about oversharing. It's about alignment. It's about your story making sense. And it's about your story standing up to scrutiny. Because if you're telling the truth and you're being genuine when you're asked questions about it, there is no concerns. And here's something that might be uncomfortable to hear, but it's important. If your application reads like it could belong to anybody, it is forgettable. So forget it. Chambers reads hundreds of applications, hundreds. Polite, competent, well-written, and utterly indistinguishable. The ones that stick are the ones where you can hear the person behind the page. That doesn't mean being gimmicky, but it means being specific. Instead of saying, I developed resilience through mooting, talk about the moot that you lost. Talk about how it felt. Talk about what you did differently the next time. And then talk about the moot that you won. Talk about the application of those lessons learned. People want to avoid things like that because they think it makes them look a certain way. But if you can look back and reflect on a difficult time and that you took those lessons from that particular difficult time and you applied it next time and you had a different outcome, best ever answer to me. Instead of saying I'm passionate about advocacy, tell me when you realised advocacy actually mattered to you. Was it watching a barrister handle a vulnerable witness with care? Was it standing up for the first time and feeling terrified but alive? Or have you not had that experience yet and the reason for coming to the bar is something aside from advocacy? Tell them, because the details matter. Now, let's talk about rejections, because nobody prepares you for how many you might get. And as I've already discussed, it is a brutal process. And rejection at the bar is not a sign that you should quit. It's just simply part of the training. It's part of the process, but only if you used it properly. We talked about reframing. Now, I didn't get pupillage the first time, and I know how easy it is to spiral into thinking that you've failed, that you're not good enough, that you'll never make it. But looking back, I can see that I wasn't ready. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I didn't really fully understand what was being asked of me. And now, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, all those no's meant that I ended up in the right place. Now, every rejection is feedback, even when it doesn't come with comments. It tells you something in your evidence isn't landing. And your job is to figure out what it is. And this is where mindset work becomes part of this process, because mindset is everything. If you see pupillage as a verdict of your worth, you will burn out. If you see it as a process you're learning to master, you'll keep improving. And it's just about how you frame those set of circumstances. So you might have one person that gets a rejection and they think their life is over. And you also might have another person that gets a rejection and says, great, how can I improve for next time? What more experience can I endure? What more mooting can I partake in? I've got another opportunity to get some more experience, information and learning under my belt that will ultimately make me a better barrister. And I always say this to students, that treat each application cycle as data. What did you change? What stayed the same? Where did you get interviews? Where didn't you? Because patterns matter, and that's how you identify the things that are landing and the things that aren't. And one of the biggest shifts I can see in successful candidates is when they stop applying blindly and start applying strategically. Now, this means that you've got to understand chambers properly, not just what their website says, but how they actually practice. What work do they really do? What kind of juniors thrive there? What skills genuinely are valued? And that means that you've got to be around them. It means that you've got to be in there to see it and feel it. I've seen applications where someone says they're passionate about social justice and then applies to a set whose work is overwhelmingly commercial with no explanation. And that's, blatant copy and paste jobby. That disconnect is fatal, because alignment matters to your values and to Chambers' values and to the position you are applying for. You get all those three aligned, and that's where success happens. Because alignment isn't about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about choosing places where who you are actually makes sense. What kind of position you're applying for actually makes sense. You don't need to be right for every Chambers. You need to be right for one. That realization is freeing. Because once you accept that you stop trying to be everything that you think a barrister is and start just being you, clearly, that's clarity. That will give you confidence. And let me tell you something, Chambers can feel it. One of the hardest parts of this process, and something I wish someone had been more honest with me about earlier, is that getting pupillage is as much about emotional endurance as it is about intellectual ability, because nobody tells you that you're going to have to learn how to keep going while feeling uncertain, whilst wanting to give up, while watching other people succeed, while wondering whether you've misjudged yourself completely and you've lost the plot. I remember seeing names announced online, on Facebook, on student rooms about scholarships, interviews, offers. And whilst genuinely feeling happy for them, that comparison game is brutal, and it's also completely misleading because you never see the full picture. You don't see how many cycles it took them. You don't see the applications they wrote 3 times. You don't see the interviews they didn't get. The bar attracts high achievers. I think that's a given, and people who are used to being good at things. And pupillage is often the first time many people experience sustained rejection, and that alone can knock your confidence if you're not careful. Here's the reframe that changed everything for me. Pupillage is not about being chosen. It's about becoming ready. Ready enough that when the opportunity comes, you can step into it and survive. And wow. Because let me tell you this now, and I say it as someone who supervises pupils, as well as having been one, getting pupillage is not the fucking finish line. It is just the beginning. It's the starting gun. And if you arrive there having only focused on getting the offer without developing the habits, mindset, and resilience to cope with the reality of practice, you'll struggle and you will leave. That's why Chambers care so much about how you deal with pressure, feedback, failure. They're not being cruel, they're being practical. They want to know that you understand this job. I've seen many barristers, academically exceptional, but struggle with the actual job because they haven't equipped themselves with the skills actually needed to survive in this profession. I've also seen people who were potentially the strongest on paper leave. And in the opposite to that, those that were potentially not the strongest on paper thrive because they were coachable, reflective, and grounded. And coachability, teachability is huge. If you take nothing else from this podcast, take this. Chambers would rather take someone who can grow than someone who thinks they already know everything. And that needs to show in how you talk about your experiences. When you're asked about a challenge, don't rush to make yourself look flawless. Nobody believes it anyway. Talk about difficulties, honestly. Talk about what didn't work the first time. Talk about how you adjusted. Did it work? Did it not? How many times did you need to adjust? That's maturity, and maturity is quite rare in an application process because people think that they need to sell themselves, and to sell themselves they have to be this finished, polished product. It's not. And having that level of maturity shows a huge degree of confidence. And let's talk about confidence, because this is where a lot of aspiring barristers get stuck. There's this myth that barristers are just naturally confident, they're extroverted, fearless, quick-witted all the time. That's a myth. But puts so many brilliant people off. Confidence at the bar is not about being loud, it's about being prepared. Preparation was instilled in me throughout pupillage. Some of the most formidable advocates I know are quite quiet, measured, understated in the background. Their confidence comes from knowing their case inside out, knowing their ability inside out, from understanding the structure of an argument, from being able to respond calmly under pressure, and knowing that they have the skills and aptitude to withstand scrutiny. Because if you're waiting to feel confident before you put yourself forward, you wait forever. Confidence follows actions, and there's no other way around it. It's not something that you're born with, it's something that you develop. It's a muscle. It's like going to the gym. If you don't train it, you'll lose it. Just like if you don't train the muscles in your arms, you'll lose them. I didn't feel confidence the first time I stood up. I felt sick. My voice shook. I spoke too quickly. Something that I haven't quite yet grasped sometimes. But I did it anyway. Again and again and again and again. Almost imperceptibly, confidence grew. And just kept growing. And I'm still growing. I don't sit here and say that I know all the fucking answers. You might think what I'm saying to you is a load of nonsense and you don't apply any of it. And that might be true. I can't speak for everybody on interview panels. I can't. But what I do know is the steps, advice, and guidance have worked for others and have worked for me. So when students tell me that they're not confident enough yet to apply to Moot to put themselves forwards, I always say to them, well, you won't become confident unless you do. You act imperfectly, and confidence is built through that process. And that's the kind of evidence that matters. That's the evidence that chambers are looking for, not just for chambers, but for you, for your clients, for your practice, for your career. So every time you do something difficult and survive it, you are teaching your nervous system that you can cope. That's resilience in practice. Again, not just a buzzword. And resilience isn't about pretending things don't hurt. It's about not letting setbacks define your trajectory. And I want to tell you another story. I worked with a student who'd applied for pupillage multiple times without success. And each cycle, their confidence dipped further, quite naturally. And they started editing themselves out of their applications and playing it safe, saying what they thought chambers wanted to hear, using ChatGPT to give the perfect answers, that kind of thing. But when we stripped it back, we realised that they had actually lost sight of their own why, their own reason for wanting this job, and it became more about the competition than the reality of the situation. They were no longer telling the truth of their own story of why they actually wanted the career, and was using some fictitious robotic answer which came across. So we rebuilt slowly, painfully, and we went back to why they were drawn to this job in the first place. And sometimes you get lost in the process, and that's okay. But it's having the ability to reflect and identify, actually, I'm losing myself as part of this process. And it's easily done. I did it, and I know hundreds of other people that also did it. So it's really important to look back and reflect on your applications to make sure you're also not losing yourself in the process. So that's it for today. I've waffled far enough. I hope you've taken something from this. And next time, we're going to be talking about those interviews that come after the application process, which will be coming around this Pupillage Gateway season very, very shortly. So if you've liked this episode, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, do your girl a solid. And if you're not following me already, the links to my socials are down below in the show notes. Until then, good luck, and over and out.